I have told every general, we have lost Vietnam, we lost Korea, we lost Iraq, we lost Afghanistan, so on and so forth. McMaster will come forth and be tried for criminal activity, as will Mathis, because there is no reason to put our men and women in harm's way for oil pipelines or whatever nonsense that this military industrial complex thinks that we need to do in order to get into the Middle East. We have no interest in the Middle East.
Well, we got some bad news breaking right now from Fox News. ABC's also reporting 4 victims reported after elementary school shooting in San Bernardino. Shooter possibly down. Police chief. Wasn't it the same place that had the Islamic shooters? And they were covering it up, who they were. And for 2 years, the FBI was trying to stop them going to terrorist training bases and coming back. At least 4 victims have been located after a shooter walked on to the North Park Elementary School campus in San Bernardino and opened fire in a possible murder-suicide. The shooter was also possibly down, according to a report from San Bernardino Police Department Chief Jared Bergund, who said the information was preliminary. So we'll watch that as that unfolds. It's an elementary school. I love how these cowards go into victim disarmament zones. It's always places like California and places this happens. And then when it's a jihadi attack on a gay bar in Florida, they won't say it's a terror attack. And they won't show you images of the dead kids that got killed by, jihadis in London a few weeks ago or last week there in Stockholm, Sweden, because they have mass Stockholm syndrome. But they will show you the dead kids that are gassed and just keep showing it to you and showing it to you. And I want to play a clip before we go to our next guest and then back to your phone calls of the former British ambassador, the head guy. There is the British ambassador to Syria. What he said on the BBC, where he said Trump has given jihadists 1,000 reasons to stage a false flag operation. And whether the Syrians really did it or whatever, now our media is saying the Russians probably did it, so we want war with Russia. Don't you see now when they already got caught doing it 3 years ago and 4 years ago, that was official? They were so uncoordinated, they would brag on videos, loading up the mortars and it would explode on them. That now they're celebrating, they're going to stage more stuff and blame it on Assad or whoever they want. I get looking strong for the Chinese president. I understand looking strong for the Russians. And I look having a big force there to kick out Al-Qaeda and ISIS in case Assad tried to attack them. But why would he do that? Why would Assad do that? Now, I know Dr. Pachenik was on last Friday to give his view on it. I've since talked to my White House source, and then Roger Stone has talked to his sources that go as high as they go. And basically the same thing. So we put an article out today. I sent the transcript to Paul Watson last night. Trump pushes back against neocon plan to invade Syria. And you read this article. This is a transcript from my source and Roger's source. I'll just leave it at that. And the president's like, no, we're not going to have a no-fly zone. No, we're not going to go take Assad out. But he agreed 4 years ago to get rid of these chemicals. He didn't do it. They're there at that air base. There's an air track to there. That's enough for me. But then what's the president thinking? It's going to blow those up. Thank God the Russians clearly, the Daily Mail has the photos the Special Forces got. The Russians have shown it on their own footage. They hauled all of it out in the hour notice they had before the missiles hit. What is Trump thinking? Because the Russians claimed they bombed an Al-Qaeda ISIS base and it had chemicals in it. And I've got my sources in the government that say absolutely. If you look at the gear people had responding, it wasn't sarin or they wouldn't not be wearing masks and stuff. They weren't. So, and that's an article. Donald Trump is an international lawbreaker by a person using a pseudonym who's been right up there with Steve Pachenik. So people say, hey, be on the fence or be one way or the other. Why are you all over the map? Because I don't know. I'm wargaming every angle of this. China, to me, is a 10 times bigger threat. They're absolutely belligerent, taking over the South China Sea. North Korea is threatening everybody, shooting missiles off. I get why Trump wants to look strong, got a big task force going in there. He's done great things in the economy, so I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then McMaster's talking about taking out Assad and ISIS simultaneously. And my military sources are saying, oh, yeah, it's a big force going in. More and more troops are there, 20,000 troops in Iraq and Syria already. Special forces, you name it, Marines, heavy artillery. So we're going to go to Pachenik here in just a minute, former head of psychological operations, State Department, obviously worked in other agencies. and been involved in regime change. Let's play that clip from Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Syria, because he's got an incontrovertible point here, just on its face. It's true. The jihadis love false flags. How are we going to keep them from doing it, whether this was real or not? Here it is.
And based on previous experience, including Iraq, we can see that we cannot take at face value what the so-called intelligence experts tell us, not when they have an agenda. But come back to the main point. It's not going to end here, and we are likely, Britain, to be dragged into it, because Trump has just given the jihadis 1,000 reasons to stage fake flag operations, seeing how successful and how easy it is with a gullible media to provoke the West into intemperate reactions. They will very likely stage an operation similar to what they did, and this was documented by the United Nations in August last year. They mounted a chlorine gas attack on civilians, and they tried to make it look like it was a regime operation. This, mark my words, you're hearing it here, and it will happen, and we'll get all the warmongers coming to tell us that Assad is defying us and we must go in more heavily into Syria. This will be fake flag.
Fake flag. That's a great way to explain false flags to folks. So Dr. Steve Pieczenik, stevepieczenik.com, best-selling author, also with Tom Clancy and more, joins us, medical doctor, psychiatrist. I won't go over his whole bio. From your angle on Friday, from all my research, is what the president currently believes. So you're spot on. You tie that into Skousen believing he was misled. I know you've learned more now over the weekend. That's why you wanted to come on, so we're honored to have you on. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, what is the latest information you have?
What I'm concerned about, and this is a warning to our generals, McMaster, Mathis, and others who think that they can do a regime change in Syria. Number one, that will not be possible. Not with the military, not with all the forces you have, and not with the quality of the soldiers that we have or the generals. Let me be very blunt. Of all the people I know, I have been probably the only one who's been interrogated by Bashar Assad for hours, at the same time worked against Hafiz Assad, and at the same time had a clear understanding of how strong the Bashar Assad family is and how entrenched they will be. So any notion of a regime change through force is both absurd and criminal. If it occurs, there will be no reason whatsoever, including chemical weapons or any other cause belli that will be espoused by either the intelligence community or the president. But the presence of constant, a huge amount of Marines and special forces and thousands of regular soldiers means that we are prepositioning to go in for a war, maybe against ISIS. But remember, ISIS and Al-Qaeda was created by us, by the CIA, by our military intelligence. So to say that we're going to attack a terrorist group which we created means we're attacking ourselves. The same issues right here in Syria. The issue of Syria and Bashar Assad has no national security interest whatsoever to America. What Bashar Assad has done to his people remains to his people. The Russians have handled it. Hezbollah has been involved. Turkey has been involved. The Israelis have been involved. But let me tell you several things. Number one, we have not won a war, including World War II. Let me make it very clear to McMaster, who's talking about dereliction of duty. This will be an incredible dereliction of duty if we go into war, either in Iraq or we can go into Syria. Why? Because McMaster knows very well we are not capable of executing an effective strike. We have never won a war. Even World War II was primarily won in 1942 and 43 by the Russians at Stalingrad. I teach that at Fort McNair. I have told every general, we have lost Vietnam, we lost Korea, we lost Iraq, we lost Afghanistan, so on and so forth. McMaster will come forth and be tried for criminal activity, as will Mathis, because there is no reason to put our men and women in harm's way for oil pipelines or whatever nonsense that this military-industrial complex thinks that we need to do in order to get into the Middle East. We have no interest in the Middle East. If anything, The psyops that was created with President Xi Jinping from China was an excellent psyops. It means we're drawing to the Asia Peninsula, that's fine. We pre-positioned for North Korea, but it does not mean we go either into North Korea or China or Syria. There is no cause for war on either flank. My concern is that, again, we're going through the nonsense of the neocons. I think that David Knight had made a point yesterday. My point was simply that the psyops that was done at Trump's hotel was very effective. But if this goes any step further, this is a warning to our generals, to our president, and to anyone involved. Once again, we will react quite vociferously and strongly. This is grounds for all types of legal action against the president and a voting that will create a desertion.
Okay, but let me stop you. Let me stop you, Dr. Pachenik, because we go from Friday, you saying, I get the PSYOP. Right. You can't prove either way where the attack came from. The jets did come from there. There are chemicals at the base. From the president's perspective, because I've learned stuff over the weekend, it's dead on what you said. The president's like, we have an agreement going back 4 years with the Russians and Assad to start moving out once we defeat al-Qaeda and ISIS. We can't say one way or the other. They didn't get the chemicals out of there. We have the intelligence. So we're going to blow them up in place, which I still have questions about. What are they going to do if they actually hit them? Thank God the Russians pulled them out. And then Trump is saying, no, we're not doing no-flies. No, we're not taking Assad out. You saw Spicer come out today and say everything that was in our article this morning. He says it word for word 1 hour ago because it came from the president. And, of course, the media has heydays with this. I'm just going to stop right there. But I get thank you letters, you name it, from high level in the White House. We get phone calls. I check stuff. Then I call Stone, who gets calls quite a bit. Let's just say quite a bit. I mean, he don't want me to talk about it, but let's say a lot. And so it's all dead on information. And the president's like, no, but I'm not going to let anybody use these chemicals. I'm going to let people know if you do use them, I'm coming after you. And it's a message. And there's a deal in place. And then folks ask the president, well, why are the troops getting massed? And he goes, I can't talk about it. Now, this is word for word from the president. So our article is key. It's a White House source. Trump is pushing back against a neocon plan to invade Syria. And then you see McMaster and others on Fox News constantly, like he's the new press secretary, saying different things than what Trump and Spicer are saying. And Spicer is taking notes directly from the president and putting them out on air. I mean, again, you listen to Spicer, it's word for word what's in our article that came out hours before. And so Roger Stone is calling. He's got some breaking news. There's a lot of breaking news taking place here as things unfold. So again, taking that intel, what do you make of that? And then expanding on it. I guess you've got some really good sources, obviously, as well, because you're word for word saying what we're getting.
Let me tell you this. I understand what you're saying. I understand what Roger may be saying. What I'm telling you is that I know for a fact the people I know in the military are increasing their force structures to the degree that there is no strategy whatsoever. In effect, I wrote this to my people in the intelligence community and elsewhere. If you have no strategy and regime change is not a strategy, do not go into war. Increasing
well, sure, if anything was ever a quagmire, it's Syria with all these different forces. So why is McMaster saying things different than the president and his press secretary?
Because it's an old technique. You have one person saying one thing, putting pressure on, then you have the president denying it. What you're doing is trying to confuse the public media, or otherwise said, you're trying to create a kind of disturbance for Assad, who's very smart. He's much smarter than our own people. He's an ophthalmologist. He's board certified. He's been in power for over 30 years. He understands what the reality is. But for the American public, which is being told two different things at the same time, you have to go back to the Bush administration, which said we're not going into war. You have to go back to the Obama administration, the Clinton administration. Everyone said
so it's the very same neocon crap. So what does the president need to do?
The president needs to understand that if he goes to war, that's his problem, and we will have a major blowback domestically. The American people do not want to have a war. We do not want to send our kids into battle. Our military is not prepared for this kind of war. I've been in the Syrian desert during the summer. It's unbearable. It is huge. It is the homes in Hamas is filled with Sunnis. Our generals have no idea what they're doing. And in fact, if this is about pipeline wars or it's about the military industrial complex, which it comes back again and again because we have no national security interests in Syria, Iraq, or Iran.
Okay, so how did you change since Friday where you thought good stroke of genius? You said PSYOP Friday, a successful PSYOP. Now you're saying you're really concerned.
Well, because going from one PSYOP to China was the appropriate thing to do. But once I hear and I understand that there are more forces in Syria over the weekend, there was artillery placed in there. And in fact, they are creating in the White House what we call a dichotomy or two messages. That's totally different from what happened on Friday. Friday, nothing was said. Nothing was said in terms of the PSYOPs. It was elegant, it was effective, and we sent out a fleet, as you said, to the South China Sea. Whether we attack North Korea, I think that's not very bright, but at least we have a presence there. But once we have a statement by McMaster, and at the same time Trump denying it, so you have a purposeful confusion, then I am saying very clearly, do not go to war. We've been through this scenario repeatedly.
Sure, so what are the neocons thinking? Why do they want to go in war in Syria, much worse than Iraq, much worse than Libya? I mean, what are they thinking?
Have a all of these neocons have never served our government. They've never been in war. They have belonged to the military industrial
complex. So why is McMaster going along with it? He's the national security advisor now, not John McCain.
Because McMaster is going to follow the orders of the president. In short, he may be committing the very sins he wrote about, dereliction of duty. There was dereliction of duty in Vietnam when he wrote about it, and Westmoreland and other generals followed through, knowing fully well we had never had a strategy, we never had an effective tactic, nor were our soldiers prepared. McMaster knows the same issues here. He knows we're not prepared, we're not effective, we have a one-to-one.
Sure, what about the Petraeus connection to McMaster?
Petraeus brought in McMaster and put him back as a lieutenant general because McMaster was basically isolated because of the book he wrote on dereliction of duty. But I'm not a fan of Petraeus, as I've said repeatedly. Petraeus went in, he self-promoted himself. He's never really been other than South Well,
sure, the reason we haven't won a war since World War II is we're in civil wars. No one ever wins a civil war. I mean, it's like sticking your hand in a beehive. There's no reason to do it.
Well, yeah, but let me be very clear. With all due respect, including my own father, we did not win World War II. What we did was to defeat the Japanese in order to release 100,000 troops, Russian troops, to go back into fight into Stalingrad and on the Western Front. By the time we went into Europe and Germany, the Soviets were on the Elbe River. So that has to be made very clear. George Marshall said it.
Well, sure. And when it comes to casualties, the Russians lost 20 million people.
In World War II.
Yeah, we didn't even lose a million. Hold on. We'll be right back. Let's talk about that straight ahead. Talk about China. Getting back to Dr. Steve Pieczenik of stevepieczenik.com. Just briefly on China. How do you think the meeting went? What's the info you've got on that? The big task force group going up there by northern China and the South China Sea, by Japan, by the Korean Peninsula. Where do you expect all that to go? You got Lindsey Graham saying everybody about it better watch Trump. You know, he's a crazy guy, as if that's some positive thing. Plus, I don't think it's true. It just shows how crazy the neocons are wanting to, quote, scare the world.
Well, that's a good question. Actually, your assistant, Nico, just gave me an interesting point. First of all, the meeting went very well. What Trump did and McMaster's did was a brilliant PSYOPs operation focusing to Syria and then shifting really to the South China Sea. The real problem now, and this is where the regime change comes in, and this is where America has to watch itself. What's happened now, and Nico informed me that 150,000 Chinese soldiers went on the North Korean-China border. To me, that's very credible, and I'll tell you why. For over 30 years, I was held back on any regime change in North Korea because for me, it wasn't very hard to bring down North Korea. There are many simple ways to do it without going to war. However, one of the things that I had been warned about repeatedly was that China could not tolerate and would not tolerate the ingress of millions of North Koreans into China. That would eventually destabilize China. So what we have going on right now is the potential destabilization of North Korea and China knows that because President Xi Jinping was humiliated, and correctly so. And he has no idea of what Trump can or cannot do, but he does understand that Trump has the willpower to use force. At the same time, we're looking at Syria, where we're building up troops. One could be the distraction from the other, or at the same time, we would have two wars going on at the same time. That's up to our president, and that's up to our generals. I warn them about wars. Taking down regimes does not mean you have to have a war. In the case of China, this has already been quite significant for Trump to have said to Xi Jinping, look, I just launched 59 missiles. I want to make sure you understand that. Xi Jinping understands that, but at the same time, the Chinese have a hold over Jared Kushner and his buildings in 666 Fifth Avenue.
Let's talk about that when we come right back. Let's talk about ways foreign powers can influence the president. And we're not talking about Russia. From my info, it's the Chinese that are manipulating us big time. We'll be back in 70 seconds with our guest, Dr. Steve Pieczenik. I saw photos over the weekend of the Yalu River, I guess in the north there of China, bordering North Korea, taken by a photographer. I even got a screenshot of it on my phone here. And it's big skyscrapers on one side, looks like Manhattan. And then on the other side, it's just grass and villages to show how deindustrialized that country is. Most people walk. Most of their highway crews carry their equipment. It's amazing. So in closing with Dr. Steve Pieczenik, before David Knight comes into the studio and takes over here in just a moment. Yeah, there's a similar photo to what I saw, even more striking. Before we go any further here, we're bringing up Jared Kushner. I don't want to make him the target, but so many times he himself admits he's a Democrat. The Democrats kind of celebrate him. And I'm told that's a distraction. It's really McMaster running wild inside the White House. But what were you going to say about Jared Kushner?
Well, I don't know Jared Kushner. I assume the best of him. He comes out of a family that was involved in real estate. He's involved in real estate. His father was indicted and convicted. The problem is they have some major properties in Manhattan. One in particular, which I know very well, is 666 Fifth Avenue. Billions of dollars have been foreclosed upon on the Kushner family, and they can't refinance that property. All it takes in the business of real estate, and believe me, I know this very well, is for one major property to go under for billions of dollars, and then it starts to be a domino effect. Kushner is a highly vulnerable target for the Chinese, for the Russians, and any foreign individuals, because their family was doing private business with the Chinese. It's the Chinese who came in and told them, we'll take care of you. Now, he can resign if he wants, he can do whatever he wants. Nevertheless, from a counterintelligence point of view, Kushner and many of those civilians there are really prime targets for foreign governments in terms of manipulation and leveraging. And if I were Jared Kushner, I would leave the White House and do the best thing he could, just say to America, thank you very much, and go back to his real estate business. Otherwise, he becomes a liability. And that liability as a civilian, it doesn't matter whether he's a son-in-law or not, becomes a great liability.
By the way, let me stop you. Even the Hill newspaper is reporting on this. This is bombshell from just 8 days ago, but I know you have amazing sources. Is this from the news or from your sources? Because you're saying that they did penetrate him and that he should just step down now. You made a lot of statements like that about Hillary that came true, so you're not making this up. Are you getting this from the news or from your sources?
I don't even have to go to my sources. This is typical counterintelligence techniques. What I use is really just simple intelligence, counterintelligence thinking. This is not out-of-the-box thinking. This is not the kind of thing that we had with the PSYOPs at Largo, where I thought really this was quite unusual. In this case, Kushner is a highly valuable target for the Chinese, for the Russians, for the Malaysians, for the Arabs, in the same way that many of the other civilians are in the Republican Party. They know it. I know it. The intelligence community knows that. So I don't need a source for that. It's just that if he were a good American, he doesn't have to serve our country in the military, which none of the neocons have. I don't care whether he's Democrat or Republican. I would resign if I were he. And I would say, look, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And put his efforts on 666 Fifth Avenue.
But to his credit, it is being reported that he didn't go along with it and they pulled out or is that just a cover story?
That's a cover story. In the business where your father's been convicted and been in jail, and the prosecutor's your own partner, Christie, none of this washes.
So is Trump elevating him to actually protect him and cover him? Because this sounds like a very bad judgment by Trump, knowing this is all going on and including him in the White House.
Well, you once asked me, why did Trump keep his whole family there? And I simply said, as a psychiatrist or as an American, he needs it for security, his own sense of security. If that's the case, then he has to rethink again why he has his own family around him with so many conflicts of interest. I can't tell him what to do. I can simply say that it's time for him to focus on the infrastructure, stay away from the wars, decrease the size of our government.
Absolutely. Dr. Pachinik, powerful. David Knight's coming in. Folks, I'm going to do 5 more minutes the next hour, and then David Knight's taking over. I cannot stress to you enough that when you spread articles from Infowars.com or videos, you're doing the Lord's work. I mean, they are trying to censor us and block us everywhere. It doesn't matter if we've been on Roku and Boxy and YouTube and all these places. Now people have those on their TVs. They purposely block us off the front pages. Even when we have the top videos, they force feed garbage from the establishment down your throat, on your iPhone, on your Droid. They just load news on when you turn your phone on to that front page. Never Infowars, never Drudge. You need to take our articles and send them to everybody you know. You need to take our articles and just hammer them. It's an info war. And if they can strangle us, they can shut all the independent press down. Also, financial support. You know, my dad came out with a fluoride-free toothpaste that's made by the biggest manufacturer in the country, private label by us. But we had colloidal silver and iodine. The adult formula is sold out. The child formula is bubble gum flavor, but it's all natural, organic. And it has everything in it but the peppermint and spearmint that's so strong, but it's still very concentrated. Super Blue for children, bubblegum flavor is available at InfoWarsStore.com. We've got our Paleo Caveman formula that's so good for the body, the joints, you name it. It's got the turmeric, the chaga mushrooms, the bee pollen, and so much more. That's back in 33% off. And our iodine is a little bit more came in, but I'm going to go ahead and discount it 25% off X2, the good halogen. Check out what it's done for so many others. Go read the reviews, InfoWarsLife.com, InfoWarsStore.com. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say, see, I told you so, that communist Chinese-style net censorship was coming to the web, because it's already here. It's being announced. The way you keep the internet open and free is you get involved more than ever. Go to Infowars.com/app. A new battleship in the fight. Infowars Live, available right now. We're looking for a crew to man it. You gonna sit down and play games and be a trendy? Or are you gonna be part of history? Don't sit by and let the internet and free speech be stolen from you. Take action.